Today I'm going to talk about men attracting women and having a purpose. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. So these thoughts are spurred on, there's a channel I watch called BASSFZz? I'm not sure. And the guy who does it goes, I think by the name Zersi? Something like that. I've never heard him actually say it. In all the videos of his that I've watched, never once have I heard him actually refer to either his channel's name or the name he goes by. So I don't know, and my apologies there. But anyway, it's an interesting channel. It's primarily focused on, a little difficult to describe, but let's just call it dating in the sense of a young man trying to find a young woman with whom to marry and raise a family. So that's the basic overarching sort of goal that he addresses. And his primary audience is young men, although sometimes young women as well. Recently, he's had several videos in which he talked about this idea of purpose. You see this advice given to people, especially it's advice to young men, that to attract a woman, various things that you should do. And one of them is have a purpose. Having a purpose is very attractive to women. And so Zerst, and again, I'm just going to go with that and forgive me if that's wrong, talked about how this is curious in that it's good advice on its own, because a human being should in fact have a purpose in their life, but that it's bad advice as dating advice for a number of reasons. And some of his criticisms, I think, are very cogent and good. Like one of the big ones that he had recently was that this is presented basically as a means to an end when it's a thing that should be done for itself. And actually in a follow-up video, he had a good title, "It's Your Purpose, Not Hers," in which he described again, like, the purpose in your life should be your purpose, but you should have this independent of a woman. And also, it's not merely having a purpose. Any purpose, no matter what the purpose is not in itself really particularly attractive to women. And as far as this criticism goes, I think this is correct. And certainly I agree with him that a person should have a purpose in their life, quite independent of trying to attract a mate to start a family with. But there is an element to this I think that he's missing. And so I want to talk about this a little bit, because it's a very interesting subject. And they're sort of two related things. One of them is that a lot of the dating advice that he's criticized, and criticized fairly, in that it can set people up with bad expectations, like, this is the stuff that I do, and then the result should follow, and then they do that stuff and the result doesn't follow, and that sets you up for disappointment and being bitter and so on. And that is very true. That can have that effect. But what he doesn't talk about is the right way to understand that sort of advice. And a place where you can see the same sort of thing, but a little bit less charged, because there's not as much at stake, is in the context of giving somebody advice for how to go on a job interview. You want to apply for a job, and the people are going to talk to you to see whether or not they want to hire you. And there's various advice you can give a person, but the thing about all of the advice that you give a person on a job interview is that it is all predicated on the person actually being good at the job. And I don't mean that merely just in having skills. Like if you're applying for a job as a programmer, I'm a professional programmer, so it kind of comes to mind. Okay, you need to be able to program. So like that's step one, and I've encountered people in the hiring process where they didn't meet that basic requirement. And it doesn't matter how well you interview at that point, if you cannot program, you can't do the job. There are also a number of other skills beyond just the sheer basic one. The same thing, like, if you're applying for a welding job, you really should be able to operate a welder and join two pieces of metal in a way that will, actually stick together using the right amount of material, not too much, too little, etc. Same thing. You need that basic level of skills. There's also a level of skill of working with other human beings. And there are a lot of things that come into this. The ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to deal with, people screw up and you just have to deal with that, and they're going to deal with your screw ups. And, the ability to communicate where you are and to get to people the things that they need, and also to tell them about the stuff that you need. Various things like this, without which, if you cannot do the job, you can't do these things, you cannot do the job. Okay, so taking that sort of total stuff, that's the basics of, would you actually be any good at this job? And that stuff has to be there. If you don't have that, then you will get the job at best by luck and probably shouldn't and would probably be better off not getting the job. There are some minor exceptions where you can get some on-the-job training, etc., luck out. But, that's kind of, the exceptions here are not very important to they don't change the general thrust. That stuff needs to be there. And it doesn't really make any sense to begin a, advice for going on a job interview with, well, first, actually be good at the job. We kind of just assume that. Like, that's most of it. Like 90 something percent, 95%, 98% is be good at the job. Now, there is some elements, however. There's a basic filter of people need to be able to tell that you're good at a job. It's not who you know. It's not what you know, nor is it who you know, but it's who knows what you know. That really is what matters. In particular, speaking of somebody who has been on both sides of this, I've been hired. I've also been in the hiring process on the flip side, hiring people. You have to be able to find out that these people would actually be good at things. And unfortunately, this being a fallen world, you will make mistakes, which is kind of what makes it a painful process even to hire people. Because you're going to screw up to some degree. But you do your best, and that's life. You have to do your best and just move on, because sitting there doing nothing won't do you any good. Okay, and I bring this up because it's going to be relevant, by the way. It's not actually a digression. But proceeding along, you need to be able to find out these things. And pretty much all of the advice you give to somebody about how to interview in a job interview is all about how to demonstrate that the basic necessities, that is 98% of this, is in fact there. That mostly what your advice is not really about even how to show off. Nearly as much, most of the time, if you look at interviewing advice, how to not hide the fact that you would be good at the job. Because will you be better than other people at this job? No one really knows, but in terms of best guesses and probabilities, maybe yes, maybe no. Maybe you're not the best person who applies for this job, in which case you probably won't get it. Unless, somebody else were to, really screw up and hide the fact that they would be better at the job than you. So really, what is the job interview advice all about when you look at it? About things like showing up on time and, being reasonably neat, but not ludicrously overdressed, and, how to conduct yourself and to have some questions to show that you've actually researched the people that you're talking to. What are these things all about? These are all about not letting your nervousness, your hopes, your fears, etc., overcome the fact that you actually have basic interpersonal skills, that you can talk to human beings, that you can see things from other people's perspectives, that you actually can, see tasks through, that you are somewhat organized, that you're capable of handling multiple stressors at the same time. Because, you've got the job stressor, but you also have to, get yourself dressed in some sort of reasonable way, etc. So, all of these things basically boil down to not covering over that skill set that is the reason they would want to hire you. As I said, it's not just, and part of why this is a good thing, it's not just the underlying skill, but also the skills of being able to work with people in a business context. Okay, so I think that's, as I said, I go there because it's less charged, and I think this is reasonably clear. So when you transfer this over, because in a sense, courting people is basically a job interview, you are interviewing for the job of being the co-ancestor of their descendants, pretty much. There's more to it than that, obviously, right? I do not mean think of this in purely, sterile business transactions, because, the two become one flesh, and etc. So, there's more to it than that, but there is, to a great degree, this that is going on. That you are basically auditioning. The two of you are auditioning each other, and just like in a job interview, because you're both auditioning each other, to work together for the rest of your lives in difficult and complex things that require a wide variety of skills. Now, there is a basic underlying, can you do this? And to some degree, there's an element of... Now, I'm going to put into this the element of attraction. Is a person simply attracted to you? Does their biology respond to your biology? Is part of this. It's massively overstated how important this is in a realistic sense. Two saints. Any two saints, no matter how attracted or not attracted to each other they are, would be able to, assuming they're physically fit, would be able to have children, raise these children well, working together, because two saints are generous and kind and understanding and patient and so on. And they will be able to overcome pretty much any of the things that not being attracted makes more difficult, because they're just going to be really good at doing all of these things. And so the added benefit of being attracted to someone is not going to be for them necessary in order to accomplish these things anyway. They'll be able to accomplish it. But in a more practical sense, people basically tend to rely on that physical attraction. And so that becomes part of just the basic package of, are you at an underlying level actually suitable for the job? Are you actually suitable as the husband for this particular woman, or as the wife of this particular man? Because Zerz is primarily focused on young men, I'm going to keep that. But most of this stuff is pretty darn parallel. So, like, are you suitable as a husband for this woman? And, a bunch of that is going to be her, like, instinctual reactions to you that encode a tremendous amount of the information that she receives. The mere fact that it is an instinctual reaction does not mean that it's a very, thin thing with very little information. It's a summary. It's a sort of instinctual summary of a whole wide collection of impressions all put together about things like, that amount to your fitness as a father. So the answer is not thought of as such, by the way. When I say that, I don't mean that, like, she's thinking of it, oh, like, how fit are you as a father, and that's what, like, physical attraction is. I'm saying that's sort of essentially the underlying thing that is going on, is that in a fallen world so imperfectly. But it's, like, basically that. It's not perceived that way, but that's what's sort of going on. So you need to have that fundamental, or that basic attraction, that physical attraction, which you don't have control over. That has to be a given. Just like with the job interview, the ability to be a welder, the ability to program needs to be a given. If you're talking about how to, like, attract somebody, it's not going to work for a person who's not attracted to you. So, like, you need that basic attraction going on. Once you have that basic attraction going on, like with the job interview, most of the advice you can give somebody is, well, how to not screw it up, how to not cover over the truth that you actually would be good as the father of her children. So that is where a lot of these things, and the various things that Zerz criticizes, really are, if you understand them in that way, they're not the things that you do in order to succeed. They are the things that you do in order to prevent you, in order to not screw yourself up, in order to not snatch defeat from the jaws of victory, roughly speaking. Now, you have to be in a position where the victory is possible. That's like, the underlying attraction, that's, being good at the job, and the other thing, like, that has to be there first. And how do you get that? Well, that's far too complex for anyone to give you advice on. It's also far too individual. And this is kind of another thing, and this is the other thing I'm going to be talking about, and I will talk about this more in a little bit, is that you can't give general advice to how to do something in specifics. And so dating advice, just like advice for how to go on a job interview, is general. You're giving it to many people. You don't know the specifics of them. And so you can't really give them the most important advice, because the most important advice is the particular advice. How do you particularly be good at this thing? Well, you can't do that in general, and that's the really big one. That's the sort of thing that really takes, like, to some degree, it's your parents' job to teach you that over the course of a decade or two, to help you, mold yourself, really, into the sort of person who will be attractive. The one other thing, and this is a general piece of advice you can give, is, if you want a low probability event to happen, like you matching up with somebody who, like, finds you attractive in the requisite sort of way, multiply the number of instances. General thing. So, if you want to catch a fish, cast bait an awful lot. If you want to do anything with a low probability of success, do it a lot, and eventually you will probably succeed. No guarantees, but probably. Okay, so, like, you need to keep on trying until you find somebody where there is a basic attraction going on, and then all of the advice in the world that anyone can give to people in general is all going to be basically how to not screw that up, how to not cover over this basic truth. So, they're going to be, so like, let's take purpose, because this is sort of the one that came up especially recently. Like, now, having a purpose, and again, there's sort of an amusing thing to this, because, like, if you're just, wandering purposeless with complete purposelessness. You're just an automaton who goes through the day with no reason why you're getting up in the morning. Like, you've got bigger problems than finding a woman. You need to actually be a human being before you try to find a wife. So, like, to some degree, like, get things in the right order. Just, like, first be a minimally functional human being. Then, once you actually are a man and not a rabbit, now you can start looking for a woman and not, a she-rabbit. I don't mean in the literal sense, in the metaphorical sense. Like, you don't want to be merely the cleverest of the beasts that crawl the earth and find a, biologically compatible other cleverest of the beasts that crawl the earth. You want to stand up and be a human being who walks, not, merely a beast who crawls. And so you need to have some purpose beyond the immediate, the gratification of your immediate impulses. Like, well, I get myself fed, and at night I get myself to bed, and in the morning I get up and get fed again. Like, you're just being a beast of burden at that point. Be an actual human being. First thing. Much more important, too, than finding a wife. Because, like, if you fail at this, then, like, you've just failed at literally everything and you can't succeed. So, I mean, this is part of two. And this is in Zerz's video to some degree, although he says it very differently. So, like, to some degree, this is also a little bit amusing just because it's fundamental and much more important. But in any event, what is it kind of getting at? It's several things, and they're all things that will cover over the, basic, the basic suitability of you as a husband for a woman, if that exists between you and that particular woman. There's several things it'll cover over. One of them, basically, is you need to actually have ways of being happy without her. And this is a simple, practical matter. The only way to be happy with a human being is if you can be happy without that human being. Obvious exceptions for things like infants, who are completely incapable of actually taking care of themselves in any way, shape, or form. As you get older, this is just simply true. If you cannot be happy without a person, you will not be happy with the person either. At least as you get reasonably close to adulthood. Once you're actually an adult, you have to be able to be happy without a person, or you're going to be clingy and needy, and you're also not going to bring anything to them. Because one of the other things about human beings, we all have our bad days, right? So one of the things that you really want in a person that you are living your life with is when you're having a bad day, they can help. If they simply need you and have nothing else besides you, if you're having a bad day, they've got nothing to help you with. So, what's worse is they're still there needing you. So, like, it's the wrong relationship. Like, the two of you should out of your surplus of being come together to create, new people and to give out of your surplus to those new people. You both need the surplus. If the only thing you have in life is each other, there's no surplus. You don't have anything. So, I'm not saying you're going to, the mere fact that you enjoy collecting butterflies is going to, like, brighten somebody else's day. Although it can. I mean, like, literally, like, sharing the best parts of your hobby when somebody, like a hobby that you have, when somebody is down, is sometimes will actually help. More likely, more of the time, you draw strength from this other thing to remind you of, the surplus goodness of God in, as especially as reflected in the world, with which to then give. So this is where you get part of your surplus of patience and kindness and energy and so on, is you draw on these sorts of sources when the other person is in a position of being needy and needing things from you. You can't draw from them to give to them. You have to draw from other things to give to them. This is why you need this sort of thing. And what it really amounts to, though, is not that a person will be attracted to you because you have this. It's that if you already have this underlying attraction and you are just needy on them, like if the first thing you do is you grab onto them like you're a lamprey and then like suck on really hard and then, start chewing so you can, begin extracting the nutrients that you want. I'm using I'm using this in a metaphorical sense, like spiritually gnawing on them to draw spiritual nutrients. That's going to be a massive turnoff. They're going to be afraid of this because they're going to see where this is going and that this is not going into good places. And so even though there's that, initial underlying attraction, it's going to break down after that because they're not going to need very much time around you to figure out that you're a sort of person who you two will not be able to work together because they're just trying to live off of you. And the two of you need to have so much excess life that together you have the ability to give to other people who are, by design, very needy for the time being. That's the thing about children. They grow up, they stop needing you. And so at some point you stop needing to give to them. And they're going to be going and doing this again in turn for others. So like this is where having a purpose, it's not so much that having a purpose is attractive, is that having no purpose other than the woman is going to be deeply unattractive. And the double negative is it's really important here, because again the point is not that a woman's going to see her purpose and think like, wow, you love stamp collecting, you love, target shooting, whatever it is, you love working out at the gym. They're not going to love you for that, because you can't love a person for a thing that's extrinsic to the person. It's intrinsically impossible to even do that. However, when you see that this person has sources of life that they're happy without you as well as happy with you, now you recognize, yeah, this can actually work. I should not be afraid of this person because they're not going to cling to me desperately like a leech or a lamprey or something to try to suck life out of my soul because they have no sources of their own. We can work together. This isn't just an overgrown child who's trying to use me as their surrogate parent. So, is it the case that having a purpose is going to attract a woman? No. Will having a purpose suddenly make women flock to you? No. What it will do, however, and again, you should do this anyway, but as Zeus himself said, but if you have the purpose in this sort of sense, where you have sources of life other than the woman you are trying to attract, when you meet her, you will interact with her in ways that do not shut down that attraction, if that attraction is there. With a woman who isn't attracted to you, it's not going to matter. So like, if she's not attracted to you, it's not going to help. But if she would be attracted to you, you're not going to shut that down before it can manifest itself. You're not going to prevent her from getting close enough to find out that she's really is attracted to you. Because attraction always proceeds in stages. It's very rare. Even in fairy tale books, it's not even all that common to like fall in love with somebody at first sight from across a room. People talk about that, but if you actually count up the fairy tale books in which that happens, heck, even Cinderella, they fall in love over the course of dancing together. It's not just like, he sees that she's pretty, comes over and asks her to dance, then starts falling in love with her as they're dancing together. I mean, even in Cinderella, it's not like, I love you, you now will be my wife. What's her name, by the way? Like, even in Cinderella, even in fairy tales, it doesn't usually happen that way. Attraction proceeds in stages, and so where this sort of thing happens is that if there's that initial attraction, if the person, if you have the underlying sort of thing to form this kind of bond, the underlying kind of attraction to form this kind of bond, having the purpose is not going to shut it down. And so it is with other things too. Whatever it is. So the physical, the things that change your physical appearance. So if you're given advice to like, to dress well, to be neat, go to the gym, and like have an at least vaguely, body that clearly is actually capable of work. You don't need to be an underwear model. The underwear models are just, as far as I can tell, the leanest people, because you'll always sort of get, at least male underwear models, you always get their abs, so like they always have like chiseled abs there, whereas like other kind of models don't always have chiseled abs, because chiseled abs are, a little bit iffy in terms of the actual utility. Anyhow, without going to that digression, you don't need to be like a male model, but if you clearly if it's dubious that you're even capable of taking out the trash, without like this needing to recover as if you just ran a marathon, that is going to also be, a turn off. But like all of those things that affect your appearance are again going to be, and these are for an earlier stage. These are for in that initial thing where a person is just going to, either be attracted to you or not. There are various things that will affect that right at that initial stage where they're more receptive or less receptive to seeing whether or not things progress into building greater attachment. So those sorts of things, like taking the time to dress at least slightly well, taking the time to be at least a little bit groomed, taking the time, to not be like completely and utterly, shaggy to the point of like actually being dirty. To have some vague thing, like for men, it doesn't need to be very much, and it can somewhat easily get into the realm of too much for a lot of people anyway. But a little bit gives a sort of signal that like, okay, you have like some of the basic abilities to take care of yourself, and therefore presumably to take care of other people as well. You have some of the, some basic, these things signify some basic things, like you have at least a modicum of self-discipline. You are capable of doing some things that are not all about like gratifying your impulses in the moment. So these things do signify useful things to each other. And again, it's not really that like being, at least slightly well groomed, having at least, like a rough body shape that shows you're capable of picking stuff up and doing basic tasks without tiring out, etc. Like, again, you don't have to hit the gym and get like a bodybuilder's physique, but like if you've hit the gym enough that you're capable of picking up some heavy things and like more than once in a day, that sort of basic physical appearance is going to, again, not show all of the red flags about like this person doesn't look like they have even a basic self-control. This person doesn't look like they're even slightly useful in a practical sense. And like in a marriage, you need to be at least slightly useful, because like people get busy, especially if you have more than one child. Like, you can be busy with one child and somebody's got to deal with the other children. There are a lot of things where like the ability to interact with your world in a way where like everything is not taking care of you, but you can take care of others, is really important. And so all of those things, like, they can seem shallow, and in some sense they are, if like that's the entirety, like if the entirety of your idea of whether or not somebody's attractive is things like, do they look, reasonably well put together and at least moderately physically, like, strong, etc. Like, if that's the sum total of your appraisal of a person, yeah, that is shallow. But these things aren't like false. Like if a person is just like, utterly slovenly, and it's not even about like being thin, as I said, it's not like being thin, especially in our modern food-rich environments. It's a little bit different. Like if you're in a place where food is very hard to come by and you're fat, in addition to being strong, then there's some big questions here. Like, how did you spend this much time on food? But in our modern food-rich environment, people don't care that much about like if you're carrying a bit of body fat, as long as you look like you're capable of actually like walking long distances, picking up heavy things and not being exhausted by it, etc. That's a lot more of what they care about, because that's really the functional thing. In our modern ludicrously food-rich environment, everybody, for the most part, except for people who are like dedicated to it, carry, a fair amount of famine resistance around with them. So again, like these sorts of things, if you look at what's really going on in them, they're used essentially as signifiers of basic personal traits. And again, it's not that if you like, groom yourself at least a little bit, wear at least halfway decent clothes, hit the gym at least, once or twice a week, that like suddenly, a woman seeing you like this is going to be like, yep, I'm attracted to that. But rather, a woman who would be attracted to you is not going to like be repulsed by like their Doritos in your hair, or like you're greasy, or like you just smell really bad, or like you look like you would collapse from exhaustion if you went and checked the mail. Those things will definitely shut down any attraction that she would feel pretty damn fast, to the point where she probably would never even notice any kind of basic attraction that then got shut down. Whereas it's very possible to like, wow, a person looks good, and then you talk to them for 5 minutes and they're like, nope. And you will kind of be aware that like, yeah, they were attractive before they opened their mouths, but then I found out, nope, definitely not interested there. And that one works both ways. I mean, both men and women can do that with other people. Like, yep, they look good, but like, nope, definitely not, after just a few minutes conversation. So, so that kind of thing definitely exists, but it exists on a spectrum. This is where like the physical appearance. And so in the same way with the physical appearance, things like purpose, which take a lot longer to manifest, are again going to shut down. When I say a lot longer, like a person with zero purpose in their life, who has no interests, where like they're only interested in you and they like want to like grab on and dig in their teeth and start extracting, life from you. Again, metaphorically grabbing on and digging with teeth. That's going to manifest over the course of anywhere from minutes to hours. Like, it doesn't take that long to find out if a person really has no ability to function independently, or alternatively, if they don't like being able to function independently, and thus they desperately want to eject that portion of their life. So like they've been forced to be able to function independently for a while, but like they want that gone as soon as possible. That stuff manifests relatively quickly. So again, it's not that it will, that getting it right is going to, is going to make it work. It's that getting it wrong is going to shut it down. So you have to get lucky. You just straight up have to get lucky. You have to meet somebody who is going to be attracted to you. But then all of the advice, and especially all of the generic advice, is all how to not shut that down. How to allow that attraction to continue to develop. Now, if there isn't really the underlying attraction there, it's not going to develop. Doesn't matter how well you get everything else, that part won't develop. So there needs to be some sort of fundamental like compatibility that forms that fundamental attraction, and that's going to be very complex and have to do with things like personality and what you've developed yourself to be and who you are and just who they are and just the sheer luck of like the two of you happening to come into contact in a way that can, where you can have some conversation and so on. So that's the thing about a lot of this, that it really needs to be understood properly. It's not that all of this, like this advice is really bad advice if this advice is how to achieve a result. A lot of this advice is at least halfway decent advice if it is how to not screw up a result if that result would if there is the underlying material for the result to happen. So what we're talking about, if we go to more formal language, is we are talking not about sufficient causes, but rather necessary causes. Things without which the result will not happen. But you can have any number of necessary causes, but if you don't have a sufficient cause, then nothing results from it. So like, for example, like if you want a bowling ball to fall off of a table, the bowling ball can't be glued down. It can't be, you can't have a buffalo laying on top of it. You cannot have something in its way. All of these things you must have all of these necessary causes. That's to say, you can't have a buffalo, you can't have this, you can't have that, you can't be glued down, you can't have, a sufficient wind to lift the thing going up the table, etc. But you can have all of those, and the bowling ball is just going to sit there because nothing's pushing it over the edge. You need something to push it over the edge, and that is, in general, individual, not general. The general advice is all about how to basically keep from screwing things up such that all of the labor that you put into finding a person with whom you have that basic underlying attraction won't be screwed, will be allowed to develop. But that has to happen, and there's no real general advice for how you get that part to happen. And there may be some people, and this is one thing too, because I know ZZz is Christian, and and he talks about it, although his advice in general he tries to make it generally accessible outside of Christianity. But this is a thing where, being Catholic is another real advantage. It is not necessarily the case that everybody is meant to have a wife. In fact, the idea that like every man should have a wife is obviously just false. And the idea that every woman should have a husband is obviously false. That's not how human beings work. There's a reason why there are monks and nuns. There are people who are cut out to be monks. There are people who are cut out to be friars. There are people who are cut out to be nuns. That is to say that the what God has given to them is not to start a family, but rather to give to humanity in other ways, like in the ways that monks or friars or nuns do. There are people to whom it has been given to lead the committed single life, where you're just a single person, not part of a religious institution, happy on your own, able to give to all the people around you. And, if you have children, you're going to give to a few people very, very deeply. If you're going to give, if you don't have children, you're in the position to give to a great many people more shallowly. And so, I mean, the thing is, this isn't strictly binary, but like children require a tremendous amount of your time, and you're going to give an enormous amount to them, and you're going to give an enormous amount about an awful lot of things in life, and that's going to take away from your ability to give to others. You're just going to have a lot less time for people besides your children. There'll be the time before your children, and there'll be the time when your children are adults. You might have a job that actually spreads you out a bit anyway, but you have to be really careful, like being a professor, for example, but you have to be really careful that you don't let that get in the way of your more primary responsibility to your children. So, side note. Anyway, the point of all of it is that it's also important to be aware that like maybe your purpose is not like maybe the purpose of your life is not to have a wife and children. Maybe you should be single. Maybe the way you're going to be happy, the way you're going to be able to give the most to help, which means to take part in the creation of creation as it unfolds, to be God's act of making creation, is in a different way. This is where, the Catholic tradition has monks and nuns and so on, and so do the Capital Orthodox. And so it's a real advantage to be within that, because you can see this as the fact that like not everyone's supposed to have a wife. And so like the mere fact that, so if you're not supposed to have a wife, you're better off not having one. And so if for whatever reason you do not attract any women, this doesn't mean you're broken or that there's anything wrong with you. This may just mean you're looking in the wrong place for what you should be doing with your life. That maybe you shouldn't have a wife. Maybe you should be serving God in some other way. Maybe you should be serving the highest value, to use like Jordan Peterson like terms. Maybe you should be pursuing the good in a different way. And you shouldn't see yourself as a failure, because to fail at a thing you shouldn't be doing is actually a benefit. Like, that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. That means just like right now you're trying the wrong thing. So of course you're failing. You should be failing. Because like if you are trying to water ski on a tennis court, you shouldn't do a very good job of it. If you're trying to play tennis standing in the water when you should be swimming, in fact, you're going to do a really bad job of it. And the sooner you put down the tennis racket and start swimming, the sooner you're getting to your actual purpose. So the sooner on the tennis court you take off the skis and pick up a tennis racket, the sooner you're going to be happy, and the sooner you're going to be doing what you're meant for. And the sooner you realize like you weren't a failure as a person, you were just trying the wrong thing. And so this is, I think, also very, very important here to understand. Like, if that underlying attraction that I'm talking about, that's specific to the individual, never shows up for you, maybe it's because like it's not supposed to. Maybe you're supposed to be doing other things. I mean, and by the way, there's a reason why the monastic life was viewed as a higher station in life than the married life. It's sort of downplayed in modern times. But like for a large fraction of history, people who could be monks, people who could be hermits, etc., within the Christian tradition were viewed as like the higher forms of life. These are the people to whom like something unusually good has been given. And so it's really important, like even if you're not in that tradition, to consider that like there are a lot of goods in this world besides marrying and having children. There are many ways of being happy besides just that. And if you're not cut out for this, but you are cut out for something else, that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That just means you're trying the wrong thing. And so it's really important to figure out like what actually are you cut out for in this world. And if that underlying attraction just never actually happens, then like maybe you're doing the wrong thing, and maybe you'll be much happier than most people who are married, who are cut out for marriage, who are, doing a fairly good job of it, simply because you're capable of something else that you can devote yourself to. Sorts of giving that just really aren't very possible if you have children. Maybe you're cut out for that, for something, frankly better than marriage. And possibly something just equivalent but different. So it's very important to get this distinction right, because it also points to that distinction of what should you be doing with life. And there's not just one thing that all human beings should be doing with their lives. We're different. We're not all given the same gifts. And some of us, just because a gift is common or typical or normal doesn't even mean it's the highest gift. So, I mean, that's another thing that's very important to bear in mind. At the same time, just because it's common doesn't mean it's the lowest gift either. And I think that's part of why, because people look down so much on the act of having children, because it reminds them of like animals breeding, like, oh, you're just, like that dismissive term, a breeder, to refer to people who have married and had children, that it's a very noble calling to take part in the creation of a human being and then to teach them what it is to be human. So it is no, it is no small thing. But at the same time, that doesn't mean it's the highest thing just because it's, so common. One of the great downfalls of modern secular culture is it can only imagine like one way to be human, and so everyone's got to be fit into exactly this mold. No matter what is going on with you, you must be exactly in this mold. And even if you don't fit this mold, you'll just fit this mold, but like differently. And you see this all sorts of things, like a lot of A lot of things that are considered alternative lifestyles are not actually different. They're the same thing. They're just trying to cram people into this mold. Like, you, as a human being, must have another single person with whom you link up, and you must physically engage with each other body to body in some fashion. This is necessary. Now, maybe it won't be with a penis entering a vagina and fertilizing the egg that's inside of the uterus connected to that vagina. But that's okay. It must be this physical coupling of some kind. That's just trying to force everyone to the same cookie cutter. So bear that in mind. Like, maybe you're cut out differently than a lot of other people. But also, bear it in mind that, like, what you're trying to do is essentially get lucky, and you just need to get everything right around that, so that if that luck strikes, you don't screw that chance up. So that's most of what I wanted to talk about here. And I forget the rest at this point, and this video is long enough anyway. But yeah, like, if you get that fundamental orientation right, a lot of the advice is a lot more useful. I'm not saying it's all wonderful advice. You'll find plenty of bad advice out there on how to find a wife, and you'll find plenty of bad advice on how to find a husband, for women. But nonetheless, like, if you look at it correctly, the advice makes a lot more sense. And even the bad advice, you can see the, like, kernels of it that are good, or sometimes the kernel's bad, but, like, parts on the side of the kernel are good. It's not always the case that, bad advice has a good kernel to it. Sometimes it's a bad kernel, but, like, there's something useful nearby it. Either way, getting this way of viewing things right, about figuring out, like, how do you properly signal things, and how do you avoid screwing things up, but realize that there's a fundamental thing that's going on that's a lot less under your control, and that what you're trying to do is just get things out of the way so that this can actually happen. It will make the entire thing a lot less stressful, and it'll make it a lot more useful. So, hope that's helpful. And until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.